Hope you've had a good day today, whatever you have endeavored to do. And what a neat thing it is at the end of the day to be together with other believers and with whom we share a commonality in Christ. And to be able to sing and pray and praise together and take a few moments and study from the Bible. I can't think of a better way to end the day. You can go home and watch the news if you want to, but it'll depress you, I guarantee you. But to come together and do what we're doing tonight and studying a little bit and talking a little bit, I think will be encouraging to all of you, and you have already encouraged me, and I want you to know that, with one exception. Somebody beat me at tic-tac-toe at supper tonight. So I'm mad, and I'm going to want a rematch. Deal? Deal? Okay. All right. We had a good time with the Andrews and visiting a little bit, and got to hang out with the boys and play a little tic-tac-toe and some other games, and enjoyed all of that. So turn in your Bibles to 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. You already know it. You know it by heart. As soon as you see it, you're going to go, oh, I know that. And you're right. Help me finish it. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We know that. You know how easy that is to say? You know how easy that is to tell someone they're going through hard times, well, you just need to walk by faith and not by sight. But have you ever stopped and thought about what that really means? What does it mean to walk by faith and not by sight? How do I do that? Let me begin by saying, and I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but throughout Scripture, the Bible presents a series of unforgettable walks. You don't read very far in the book of Genesis, and there is God walking in the garden in the cool of the afternoon, calling out the name of the first man as he and his wife are playing hide and seek from God. Don't do that. Or there's the hard walk of Abraham up Mountain Moriah with his son Isaac in tow, and every step taken by the old man is excruciatingly painful, not just because of the elevation, but because knowing what God has asked him to do. There was the walk of Moses and the Israelites along a dry path that had previously been part of the Red Sea. There was Joshua's triumphant walk with the army of Israel around and around and around the walls of Jericho. When you get to the New Testament, there's two disciples walking on the road to the little village of Emmaus, talking with this stranger who turns out to be the resurrected Lord. And later they said, were not our hearts burning within us while we walked on the road? Saul of Tarsus took a walk with papers in his pocket, headed to Damascus. And it was a walk that was interrupted, and it was a walk that changed his life. And I read about the Savior's walk from the Praetorium to Golgotha, a walk that changed your life. And how many times in the New Testament is the Christian life compared to a walk? Ephesians 4 and verse 1, 1 Thessalonians 2 and verse 12, walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called. But one of the most unforgettable walks in Scripture was taken by the man we know as Simon Peter. The night he decided to get out of the boat and go for a walk on the water. And yet Peter's walk, I think, to be an invitation for all of us to step out in faith. An invitation to do with God's help what you and I cannot do on our own. An invitation to live out 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7, to walk by faith and not by sight. There's times individuals need to do that. There's times that we as individuals need to take God by the hand and go for a walk. There's times when churches need to take God by the hand and go for a walk of faith. But please be advised that when you take that walk, it will involve risk and fear, and it will always involve faith. But one thing is for sure, if you're ever going to walk on the water, the first thing you have to do is make a decision to get out of the boat. My Bible's open to Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 22. Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 22. This scene that I just read it again and again. It's one of my favorite in the New Testament. Matthew 14, beginning in verse 22. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowds away. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, between 3 and 6 a.m., he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. And they said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." Here's the interesting thing in all of this. They were only crossing the Sea of Galilee. Jesus, wanting to spend time alone with the Father in prayer, had sent them on ahead. That was no problem for the likes of Peter and Andrew and James and John, because they were fishermen by vocation. They knew every square mile. They knew every square inch of this body of water. They had spent, it seems to them, their life in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. And it was no problem for the others either. They were all Galileans. And so they would have crossed this sea, sometimes called Lake Gennesaret, 8 miles across, 13 miles long. They would have crossed this body of water dozens, if not hundreds of times. But tonight was different. Because tonight a storm blows in, not exactly a minor squall. Verse 24 says, the boat they were in, the boat was battered by the waves. The Greek word there could be translated tormented. They were tormented by the storm. John says they had rowed 3 or 4 miles against a strong wind. And by now it's between 3 and 6 a.m. And the disciples are worried, not just about getting to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now they're worried about, are we going to be able to stay alive? Are we going to survive this? And in the midst of all of this chaos, they look and they see the shadowy figure of a man moving in their direction. If you look at verse 26, like all of us who would have been in the boat with them, they were convinced they were seeing a ghost. And they looked again, and when they saw that a man was approaching them walking on the water, they were terrified. read somebody who was critical of them, who actually made the comment and said, how can this be? How could these men not know this was Jesus? How could they have not figured out this was Jesus? How come they didn't recognize him? And then I thought about that. And I thought, how often do we do the same thing? How often are we in our lives terrorized, if we can use that word, by fear, battered by waves of turmoil and trial and trouble in our own lives, and we don't recognize the nearness of God to us any better than did they? So maybe we shouldn't be so hypercritical of them. But here's an interesting question as you look at the text. What's Jesus doing? And why is he doing this? What's his motive? I want you to hold your finger here. I want you to go to Mark's account because Mark adds something that Matthew does not. In Mark 6 and verse 48, Mark 6 and verse 48, Mark adds this very interesting element. At least I think it is. Mark 6 and verse 48. Seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He says the same thing Matthew did. Then he adds this. And he intended to pass them by. What's that all about? What does that mean? He intended to pass them by. There are certain defining moments in Scripture where God presents himself to man in such a striking fashion to communicate an unforgettable message. In the Old Testament, for example, God takes Moses, puts Moses in the cleft of the rock, quote, while my glory passes by. Another occasion, God tells Elijah to go stand on the mountain, for the Lord is passing by. Here comes Jesus walking on the water, intending to pass them by. Pattern? Well, I don't know. But I know this. In each of those cases, and in many more, it was critical that God get their attention. And so whether God appears in the burning bush, remember we talked about that the other night? Or the quaking of the Mount Sinai, or the walking on the water. This is God revealing the divine presence. This is God revealing himself and doing something that only God can do. So before Jesus takes these men any further in the mission that he has in store for them, before he takes them any further, he has to get their attention in a way they would never forget. I think he got it. I think he got their attention. 12 disciples in a boat, filled with confusion and wonder and disbelief and paralyzing fear. And then one of them had that light bulb moment, and one of them decided, maybe I need to go for a walk. So, here's what I want to do. I want to take that verse in 2 Corinthians 5:7, we walk by faith and not by sight, and I want to merge it with this scene over here in Matthew chapter 14 that we just read, and this scene of Jesus walking on the water. I want to take both of those and bring them together, because I think what you have in the Matthew 14 passage, you have some things that will help us understand what it means to walk by faith. So if you're taking notes, just write 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to give you 4 facts about what it means to walk by faith based upon what we just read in Matthew chapter 14. What does it mean to walk by faith in real time, in real life? Number 1, if you're going to walk by faith, and we've already said this, the first thing is you got to get out of the boat. You got to get out of the boat. There's some Bible scenes that artists down through the years have sought to capture and paint on canvas. And sometimes they do a pretty good job. Sometimes they don't. You have seen, for example, you have seen the painting of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. You see that everywhere. And Da Vinci was a master artist of the Renaissance. And, but every time I look at that painting, I kind of smile a little bit, at least on the inside, because he's got it all wrong. For one thing, Da Vinci in that painting has got them all seated Western style, seated around a table like we sit around the table. Well, they didn't do that back then. But the other odd thing about the Da Vinci painting is he's got them all seated on the same side of the table, which is odd. I have a friend of mine who called me up one day. He's one of these guys, every church has one of these, seems like somebody has the guy always has the joke of the week or whatever it is. So he calls me up with the joke of the week. And he says, hey, he said, do you know what the last thing said at the Last Supper? And I said, I have no idea. And he said, yeah, Jesus said, fellas, if you want to get in the painting, you got to get on this side of the table. You know? But I've seen the same thing with artists painting Jesus walking on the water. And I've seen paintings of Jesus in this long flowing gown. The moon is full, and he's just tiptoeing along on this glassy sea. So serene. It wasn't that way at all. In fact, there was a storm. You can imagine the size of the waves and the strength of the wind, the dark of the night. And suddenly, put yourself in Peter's place. The Lord's passing by and issuing you an invitation to step out in faith. But at the same time, you're scared to death. So suddenly he has a choice. Walk on the water, stay in the boat. The boat represents the safe and secure place. The water, well, there's a storm. And if he gets out of the boat, he might not make it. If he gets out of the boat, he might fail. If he gets out of the boat, he may drown. But on the other hand, there's a 100% certainty, guaranteed, that if he doesn't get out of the boat, he'll never walk on the water. See, well, what's all this about? I don't understand the connection. Okay, here it is. All of us have a boat. All of us have a boat. Your boat is what represents security for you. Your boat is what represents safety for you. Your boat is where you put your trust. Jesus said in Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21, he says, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. For some people, their treasure, their boat, is their money. As long as I've got enough money, as long as I've got enough in the bank account, then I feel safe and I feel secure. That's my security. With other people, it's their job. We talk about job security. With other people, it's relationships with people and family. With other people, it's success. On one occasion, Jesus asked a very rich young man, if we can use the analogy of the boat, he asked the very rich young man to get out of his boat. And the rich young man didn't want to get out of his boat because he had a nice boat. He had a yacht. The rich young ruler. He didn't want to leave his stuff. And Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, you got to put me before your stuff. You know, churches have boats, I've noticed through the years. Sometimes churches, their building, their physical plant, it becomes their boat. Everything seems to revolve around just that. Sometimes tradition becomes our boat. This is the way we've always done it, and we ain't ever going to change. Doesn't matter, there might be other ways to do the same thing biblically, but we get stuck in that, and so tradition, we just won't get out of that boat. With other churches, it's saving money more than saving souls. That becomes more important to them. But here's what I've noticed. People like to stay in their boat, and they don't want anybody rocking it. But sometimes the Lord rocks your boat. Sometimes Jesus stands nearby and says, you need to go ahead and get out of that boat and walk over here to where I am. So that's the first thing we need to understand. If we're going to walk by faith, you got to get out of the boat. Secondly, if you're going to walk by faith, you got to understand this. The storm may not go away. If you're going to walk by faith, the storm may not go away. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but when Peter stepped out of the boat, the storm didn't go away just because he had faith. I think some people have the idea as they're going through trial and trouble in life that, well, if I have faith, I'm going to step out of the boat. I'm going to have faith. Lord, take it away. He doesn't always do that. The challenges of life just don't disappear because you have faith. God, though, through that faith will give you the strength to handle whatever you have to face. But in my mind's eye, I see Peter going over to the edge of that boat, and he's got 22 eyes watching him. Because these men who have spent time with Jesus have also spent time with Peter. And they have seen him shoot his mouth off one too many times. And in their minds, I know, because the way we think as people, in their minds, they're thinking, let's see how far he's going to go with this one. And I see Peter going to the edge of that boat. And he puts one leg over, and he's holding on for dear life. And he puts the other leg over, and he's holding on for dear life. And all of a sudden, Peter does something off the charts religious. He lets go. And for a moment, Jesus smiles, and Peter is beaming. And then it happened. Verse 30. But seeing the wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. I wrote down the words reality check right there. Reality check. All of a sudden, Peter realizes what he's done. He's on the water, and the boat's over there, out of reach. And fear sets in. Paralyzing fear. Just like it sets in with us. Because it's easy to quote 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. We walk by faith, not by sight. Do you understand how hard that is to do? There's a guy by the name of Larry Lawden who wrote a book on, it's really a business type book. It's about risk management. And he made this statement. He said, we live in a society that is so fear-driven, we suffer risk lock. It's like traffic gridlock, in that we are unable to take the necessary steps that would energize our lives. And I think he's right about it. I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but everything in life is risky. I saw a statistic the other day that said, on average, in the average course of a year, 25,000 people are treated in hospital emergency room from injury sustained when they fell out of bed. So think about that tonight. By going to bed, you're taking a risk. You might fall out and end up in the emergency room. You know? Everything in life is risky. Everything. I don't care what it is. Several years ago, I was in Lexington, Kentucky for a week, and I had my little granddaughter with me that week. And she's 18 now, but at that time she was probably about 10. And so she goes with me for a week. And we took a day and we went to Kentucky Horse Park, which is a theme park for horse lovers and all that kind of deal. And we just had a great time. And so she loved horses, and I do too. So we went. We had a great time going to all the shows and seeing all the exhibits. And she said, can we go do the trail ride this afternoon? I said, sure. So we signed up for the 2 o'clock trail ride. And she was so excited about getting on a horse, a real horse, and riding and going on a trail ride and all that deal. So we did. So we get there, and the first thing they do is hand me about 4 pages of paper detailing all of the ways a horse will kill you. And so you got to read through all this legalese about everything that could possibly go wrong, and then you either sign it and ride it or don't sign it and go do something else. So I signed it. So they take the group and they divide the group between people who were experienced riders and then those who were not experienced riders. And so we had horses at the time. We had horses for a long time, so it wasn't a big deal. And so they got everybody divided up, and she got her horse, and everybody has a horse now but one person. I didn't have one. And they looked at me and said, you're good with horses. I said, yeah. He said, we've got the perfect horse for you. I didn't like the way that sounded. And about that time, out of the barn, they led the biggest horse I have ever seen in my life. He was a Belgian. Think Clydesdale. They said, his name is Big Boy. I said, well, that fits. They said, he's one of the most gentle horses we have, but everybody's afraid of him, and so he doesn't get to go on trail rides that often, and he loves going on trail rides, and if you're willing to ride Big Boy, we would love to put you on him and let him go on his trail ride. You're not going to have any problem with him. He's a great horse. And I said, okay, that's fine. I have one question. They said, what is it? I said, how do I get on him? They said, we'll bring you a ladder. So they bring out a step ladder. I had to go up 3 rungs on that ladder to get up high enough to throw a leg over that horse. So we start riding, and after about 5 minutes, I figured out why nobody rides these horses. Because the girth of these animals is so wide. I've got a leg going that way, and I got another leg going that way. And after about 10 minutes, I was done. I couldn't wait to get back to the barn. And I thought, I read 4 pages of how horses will kill you and maim you and all that kind of deal. Not one word in there was about the fact that you'd never be able to walk right again, Everything you do in life carries risk. Everything. You could argue that if I step up to the plate, I may strike out. Yeah, you may. The best ones do. But if you never step up to the plate, you'll never know what it's like to hit a home run. And if you never get out of your boat, whatever your comfort zone is, then how are you going to know what it means to walk by faith? Third, write this down. If we're going to walk by faith, we have to accept the life challenges as the process we pay to grow. We have to accept these life challenges as the price we pay to grow. Look at verse 30. It says, Peter became afraid. Here's the interesting question people always ask. Did Peter fail? Well, if we just look at a checklist, we go down the checklist. Did his faith waver? Yes, check. Did he take his eyes off the Lord? Yes, check. Did he sink down into the water? Yes, check. Did he cry out and say, Lord, save me? Yes, check. Yes, 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 yes. Peter failed in all of those areas. And so we get up and we preach sermons about Peter, the failure, who sank after he got out of the boat. Now I'll tell you a little secret. That's not a secret. Peter wasn't the one who failed. The ones who failed were the 11 guys who stayed in the boat and were too afraid to move. Peter was the only one to get out of the boat. And yet he bears the brunt of public scrutiny when he was the only one who knew the glory of walking on the water. He was the only one who knew what it was like to do something that man can't do on his own. And he was the only one who shared a connection with Jesus when he raised his hand and found that his hand was grasped by the hand of the Son of God and pulled to safety. Only because he was willing to get out of the boat. The worst failure in our lives is not the fear of failing and falling and drowning. The worst fear is to just stay right where we are in our little comfort zone and never walk by faith. Dads, you'll never lead your family as a God-man of both steel and velvet until you lead your family by example and show them what it means to get out of the boat and walk by faith. Moms, you want to be the matriarch of your family? You want to teach and train your children as the example in Deuteronomy chapter 6, and teaching them when they sit in your house and when they walk by the way, when they lie down, when they rise up, then you have to set an example in front of them, an example of being willing to walk by faith. Those who become elders, same thing. The greatest work that shepherds can ever do is to set the example in front of a congregation of men who are going to walk by faith and challenge God's people and motivate us and cast a vision for us. Bible class teachers, it's the same thing. Worship leaders, it's the same thing. It's easy to just operate in the mindset of the status quo. This is the way we've always done it. When maybe what we need to do is get out of the boat and walk by faith. So what have we said? If you're going to walk by faith, you got to get out of the boat. If you're going to walk by faith, you have to expect challenges to come. And third, if you're going to walk by faith, you have to accept those challenges as the price you pay to grow. And last, if you're going to walk by faith, that's when you connect with a living God. You can think of a lot of reasons to stay in the boat, but Jesus wasn't in the boat. Jesus is out on the water. And he says, come to me. Now, we like to take our lives and we want to comfort code everything. And we want to pretend like I've got it all together and I've got everything taken care of. I've got this manageable life that I control. Everything is secure, predictable. I've got insurance that covers everything. All the while maintaining this illusion, everything's in control. When in reality, you don't control anything. You know, Jesus said to the same Peter on another occasion, Satan has asked permission to sift you like wheat. I wonder if your name ever comes up, or mine, to see how we're going to respond when things don't always go as we have planned. And so our world gets turned upside down, all the while Jesus stands nearby and says, come to where I am. I'll take care of you if you'll come to me. I read in verse 31 that immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? I got to thinking one day about this scene. When Jesus took hold of the hand of Peter, they were out. They were away from the boat. Here's my question. Did Jesus make Peter swim back to the boat? Doesn't say, does it? I can't imagine Jesus grabbing the hand of Peter and saying, oh, well, you're on your own, you can swim. Because in my mind's eye, I see him lifting Peter back up. And together they walked back to the boat on the water. Interesting. So maybe it's time you and I quit making all of our excuses and get out of our boat. And you know, the illustrations of this, the relevancy of this is all over the place. Dozens. It could be as simple as inviting others to come and join you at worship. We come up with all kinds of excuses. Well, if I invite somebody to come, what if they don't come? Or what if they reject my invitation? What if they reject me? Well, how will you know if you never get out of the boat? Or hospitality. We come up with all kinds of reasons why I'm so busy. Our house is really small. I work outside the home. Maybe when the kids get grown, maybe when my husband retires, maybe when we get a bigger place, and we come up with all these kinds of things. When hospitality doesn't have anything to do with any of that. Hospitality is simply sharing what God has given to you with others. We spent so much of our time the last 3 or 4 decades defining what hospitality isn't. Because I've heard it. If I heard it once, I've heard it 100 times. Oh, Brother Adams, hospitality is not just having people in your home. Okay, I get that. Check. Got it. But isn't that part of it too? When was the last time you opened your home to brethren here that maybe you need to get to know a little bit better and invited them to come sit down at your table and share a simple meal? You don't have to be Martha Stewart. You just have to be you. I ate at the Smiths home last night. Let me tell you how hospitable they are. I was met with this wonderful golden doodle named Lucy. And she welcomed me into that home with hugs and kisses, lots of kisses. And she was just so hospitable, And I loved it because our dog, we have a golden. Our golden retriever is named Lucy. Her official AKC name is Lucille Ball Ricardo. That's her name. So I got to spend time with Lucy last night. So go over there sometime and you can enjoy that wonderful slobbery hospitality. I was in a meeting in College Station, Texas, and there was one evening, and we didn't have to eat every night that week. And one evening, went over this. They said this couple is a young couple. They're just finishing up grad school at Texas A&M, and never been to their home before. So we went over there, little bitty home, just right off the campus. And getting 4 people around the table was really hard because it was so small. And they didn't have a lot, but it didn't matter. And to this day, when I look back to that week, and we were in a lot of nice, fine homes that week, that's the one I remember. That's the one I remember. Or sometimes you go places and maybe here's a couple and they just got married and they signed the meal list. You know, when they come up to me and they say, Brother Adams, you're going to eat with us tomorrow night. There's part of me, and we just got married, there's part of me that goes, oh no, you know. I was in Maryland and this young couple just got married and they said, you're coming to our house tomorrow night, could you bring something? I said, sure. What do you want me to bring? They said, a chair. I said, we only have 2. So I brought a chair. I brought a folding chair. It was fine. It was great, you know. Another place, this young couple, they just got married, and I was their first company, and okay, so we're sitting around this little card table. She's passing food, and I noticed there wasn't a lot of food, so we're passing food, and I got the peas, you know, the green peas, and I scraped some out on my plate. And she said, this new bride said, I didn't know how many green peas to make. So I made enough for all 3 of us to have 10. So I looked at my plate, I looked at the bowl, and I go, oh. So I scraped some back in, because apparently I got too many. But you know what? You got to love that spirit, that wonderful spirit. Or maybe it's teaching a class, or maybe it's participating in service in some kind of way. Maybe it's going to a funeral home. I have people tell me sometimes, a guy told me, I don't go to funeral homes because I never know what to say. It's awkward and I just don't know what to say. And I said, join the crowd. But how hard is it just to tell somebody you love them and you're going to lift them up in prayer? How hard is that? But I'll tell you a little secret. They're not going to remember what you said anyway. They're going to remember one thing. You showed up. Show up. Just show up. There's 101 ways we get out of our boat. We get out of our comfort zone. God help us to get out of our comfort zone and look around us at people who need us, and people we can encourage and help, and just be available for them. That's my lesson. Thank you all for listening. We can help you in some way tonight with the gospel message of Jesus. It's so important. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. We can't emphasize the salvation that Jesus gives us by our faith through His grace. And what an amazing thing to think about. Well, if we can sit and study with you in some way, or talk with you, or encourage you in any way, we certainly want to do that. Won't you come while we stand and sing?